So day 13 and day 14 in the trial of the state of Minnesota versus Derek Chauvin, we heard our final two witnesses. The evidence portion of this trial is over. So in those final two witnesses, did we hear from the defendant? Did we hear from Derek Chauvin? Well, you're about to find out. My name is Joshua Roberts, attorney at law, and you are watching Lawyer Up. In today's episode, we're going to talk about the last 2 days of trial, day 13 and day 14. They were both partial days, and we only heard from two witnesses over the course of those 2 days. So we're going to hear the testimony from the defendant's medical expert, who is a pathologist. And then we're going to hear from the state, who in their rebuttal case recalled their breathing expert, who basically said everything that the defendant's expert testified to was wrong. So remember to like, comment, subscribe, and share. And note that Lawyer Up is now available on all major podcast formats. So let's get to it. So on day 13, the court proceedings kicked off with Judge Cahill quashing the subpoena for Maurice Hall. Now remember, Hall was in the vehicle with Floyd on the day that he died. He does not have to testify at this point. He had been identified during the trial by Courtney Ross, who was Floyd's girlfriend. So she had identified Hall as a suspected drug dealer from whom Floyd had obtained narcotics. However, Hall had told the court that he wanted to invoke his Fifth Amendment privilege against making any incriminating statements against himself. So Judge Cahill had asked lawyers to draft some questions, and he was going to ultimately decide if a certain amount of testimony would be appropriate. But on day 13, Hall actually appeared in front of the judge and said, "I'm fearful of criminal charges going forward. I have open charges that are not settled yet." And so then Judge Cahill quashed the subpoena, which means he canceled the subpoena. So we know officially now that Hall will not testify at this trial. So as we know, throughout the trial, Chauvin's attorney, Eric Nelson, has tried to sow reasonable doubt against the prosecution's case that Floyd died because of restraint by the police officers, and specifically because of Chauvin's knee in Floyd's neck. And the defense, we know, has argued that Floyd died from a combination of things, including heart disease and fentanyl and methamphetamine, which were all found in his system during his autopsy. And so the defense called on day 13 their own medical expert, who actually added a couple of other additional contributing factors. The defense called Dr. David Fowler. Now, he is a former Maryland chief medical examiner. He testified for more than 5 hours at the murder trial, and he is a forensic pathologist. He stressed that there were a lot of different factors that played a significant, his words, role in overwhelming Floyd's body and in causing his death. So Dr. Fowler testified that Floyd died of sudden cardiac arrhythmia caused by several factors during his subdual by the police. Now, this, of course, is contrary to the state's medical experts who testified that Floyd died from asphyxia. Now, Fowler said that Floyd's heart condition, his drug use, and a potential tumor on his pelvis, this is somewhat new. He said that tumor caused an excess increase in adrenaline release, and that all these played a significant role in the man's death. And for the first time, the court heard of another potential contributing factor, that being carbon monoxide poisoning from the tailpipe of the nearby police car while Floyd was pinned to the ground. On cross-examination, the prosecutor said, "Well, how do you know the car was even running?" And Dr. Fowler testified that he specifically asked this question when he was reviewing for the case. And he said he confirmed it because he could see water dripping from the tailpipe in videos. So obviously this was a very interesting point. If you have somebody's head pinned to the ground for 9 minutes while vehicle exhaust is blowing in on them, I mean, that's bad news. That's a situation where you could get carbon monoxide poisoning. And surprisingly, Floyd's blood was not tested for carbon monoxide in the autopsy. So this was seemingly important testimony, and it was important testimony at the time. Fowler also said he ruled out asphyxia as a cause of death because he found no bruising on Floyd's neck or back, and he suggested that if Chauvin had exerted significant pressure, there would have been bruising. And here was the back and forth. The question was, in your opinion, the absence of such injury, how does that speak to the cause of death? Dr. Fowler's answer was, it speaks that the amount of force that was applied to Mr. Floyd was less than enough to bruise him. Now, note, we recall that several medical experts presented by the prosecution said that the absence of bruising wasn't important and that the weight of Chauvin's knee and body was sufficient to asphyxiate Floyd. So Fowler then went on and testified that if he were the medical examiner in the case, he would classify the death as undetermined because there are so many potential factors that played in the death of George Floyd. Now, one knock against Fowler is that he is a party in a lawsuit. He's being sued by a Maryland family in the death of a black teen named Anton Black. Black's death was eerily similar to Floyd's. Anton died after he was pinned to the ground by police officers back in September of 2018, and he also, during that episode, had cried out for his mother. Very, very similar. Fowler had classified that death as accidental. Upon cross-examination, the prosecution did get Fowler to acknowledge that he's not a heart expert or a lung expert or a toxicologist. He also got Fowler to acknowledge that low oxygen levels did play a role in Floyd's death, and that Floyd did not exhibit any signs of a fatal fentanyl overdose. In addition, Fowler was also critical that the officers failed to provide CPR after no pulse was detected. And that was day 13. Then we moved to day 14, and they begin the day with Derek Chauvin advising the court he will not be testifying in his own defense. And that's an interesting decision. It's usually advisable when your client or the defendant doesn't have a lengthy criminal history, then sometimes you'll go ahead and put them on the stand because they don't have that to cross-examine them with. If you got a client with a rap sheet longer than his arm, you never put them on the stand. But there was a decision to be made here, and they decided to not call Derek Chauvin. So the defense then rested after calling 7 witnesses over 2 days. Now, in the rebuttal case, which the state is allowed to do, the state then recalled Dr. Martin Tobin, and he was the breathing expert they had used in last week of the trial. And he basically just said, well, everything that the defendant's expert just said is wrong. Tobin stated that there are several other levels in the body that measure carbon monoxide. And he used fancy words like carboxyhemoglobin and arterial gas blood saturation. And he said those readings were taken in the autopsy, and they would not have been within normal ranges like they were with Floyd had he had significant carbon monoxide poisoning. After Dr. Tobin's testimony, both sides rested for good. And that ends the evidence portion of this trial. That is over. The judge actually dismissed the jury until Monday when closing arguments are scheduled. So there's no formal court tomorrow or Friday, as the lawyers will actually be working on jury instructions, which will guide the jurors in their determination of guilt or innocence during their deliberations. Now, as always, I'll update you if something significant happens, but we don't anticipate anything of major consequence happening before closing arguments. So that's the episode. I hope that you have enjoyed it. I hope you've enjoyed this journey. It's coming to an end on this particular trial, but subscribe to the channel because we'll be moving on to other things, other issues, and other topics. So last but not least, you guys remember and know that I love it when you share me on social media. I hope you guys have a great day. I'm Joshua Roberts, attorney at law, and you've been watching Lawyer Up.
Send lawyers, guns, and money.